to God. Christians have said for years, look at the name Elohim. That word, Elohim, which means God in the Bible, really is a plural. Because in the Hebrew language, when the word is masculine, then in order to make it plural, you put a yud mem at the end of the word, and that makes it plural. So Christians will say, aha, now I got you. Actually, in the Bible when it says Elohim, it actually is telling us that there's a plurality there. It's not only one God. The fact that the actual name of God ends with a plural suffix tells us that there's something plural going on there. One of the questions I always love to ask on that is, if that's the case, if the name Elohim indicates a plurality, then why is it not that every time that word is used, it's in the plural? Many times you see it says Elohei. Can't you get it straight? Why does it sometimes say one and sometimes it's plural? What's interesting, the Bible doesn't have the names for false gods. The way false gods are called in the Bible, other gods. Elohim Achirim. When it uses the term for false gods, foreign gods, it never will say other Adonai. It will never do that. It will never say another Jehovah. It will only use the term Elohim to describe the foreign god. Of all the names of God, that's the only one that's used about false gods. Why is it that that name is so different? The answer is very, very simple, and that is that the name of God, of course, is an accolade of God. And the name Elohim comes from the word Al, which means powerful, which means mighty. Oh, the great mistake of the ancient pagan world was when they saw rain, to them, they saw that was God, a good God that was giving them a harvest. When they saw lightning, that was another God to be reckoned with, but that was an angry God. Earthquakes too were an angry God. But that sunny God, the God of the sun, that's the God of love. They couldn't understand that when you see different powers in the world, they didn't realize that it all emanated from the one who had all the powers from it. And that was Elohim. And that's why that name is plural. As a matter of fact, when we look in the beginning of the book of Genesis, chapter 1, 2, and 3, that's the name that's used predominantly. Why? Because that's what God is creating the world. The great mistake of the pagan world is when they see different forces that appear to them to be contradictory, they cannot put them together into one source. They simply are worshipped as separate gods. The name Elohim, what that connotates, what that underscores is the different powers in the world. Since indeed the sun has power, has energy, since the rain is a system that has power and has energy, since fire has power and has energy, they are Al. They are full of power, but they are not the source of all the powers. And that's why false gods are also called Elohim or Elohei. Why? Because they have power, but they are not the source of the powers. And there's one God, Elohim. He's the source of all the powers. They don't realize that these names have meaning. We find that agents of God, as we saw in Psalm 82. For instance, people who were judges and therefore taught and judged God's divine teachings, they were called Elohim because they were considered agents of God. One of the foremost verses that missionaries use comes from the book of Isaiah. I've seen Jewish people confronted with this verse. They panic. The reason why they're panicking is because they're actually looking at one of the most exotic reconstructions of the Jewish scriptures. It comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 9. And again, we've seen this before. Sometimes the Jewish Bible and the Christian Bible divide verses up somewhat differently. In a Christian Bible, it would be Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 and 7. And in a Jewish Bible, it would be Isaiah chapter 9, verse 5 and 6. And let me reassure you that these are intended to be the same verses. It's because the last verse of chapter 8 is in chapter 9 in the Christian Bible. That's what forces the verses in a Christian Bible to be one verse later than in a Jewish Bible. Let's examine these words as it appears in the King James Bible, verse 6 and 7. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end, upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. So, as you can well imagine, Christians point to this verse, and they have done so for many, many centuries, and said here is a clear reference to Jesus in the Old Testament, and not only is it a clear reference to Jesus, but look at what this person is supposed to be called. Look at who he is. Look at the names there. And of all the names that we read, for instance, the Prince of Peace, Mighty God, and Everlasting Father, of all those names, which name do you think is the one that really gets Christians going? The Mighty God. So here you see clearly from the Old Testament that indeed the Messiah himself is supposed to be a God, God himself. If looking at these two verses, does it seem like it's talking about an event that's going to happen in the future or an event that has already happened in the past? It looks like events that are going to happen in the future. By the way, in the English language, we call that past and future. The Hebrew language, they're called something a little different, and I'm not going to use that terminology tonight because it's not a terminology you're probably comfortable with, but it's called the perfect and imperfect tense. The perfect tense means I drank, which means I had already completed it. So that's called the perfect tense, or the perfect tense means past, sometimes called past perfect. And then there's something called the imperfect tense, which means I will drink. That means it hasn't happened yet, so it's called imperfect. But we'll call this for tonight past and future. See, what actually we're dealing with is not verses that are telling us what is going to happen in the future. We're dealing here with verses that are telling us about an event that has already occurred. You see, that's a little annoying because these verses were written about 700 years before Jesus' time. And if we're saying these events have happened in the past and this child already was born, well, that creates a problem with Jesus. Every time there's a tense to be changed, you can be sure the Christians have to make sure that it appears to the viewer as if it's in the future tense. Because, of course, it'll make no sense if it's in the past tense. Now, how do you know that? Well, let's take a look at a few of them. Look at the Jewish side, for instance. For a child, it really says, has been born. It's interesting, by the way, the New American Standard has it as a child will be born. Really throws it into the future even more than the King James does. But the word in Hebrew, yulad, is not talking about an event that will happen in the future. The word yulad means, some of you speak Hebrew, it means someone who has already been born. Well, how do you know that? Maybe Rabbi Singer is changing it because I don't want you to believe in Jesus. Well, that's not it. If you take a look, remember our technique. What we do is we simply look at where a word appears in other places in the Bible and see how Christians translate that exact same word in all the other places. Now, we don't have enough room because that's a very common word. So what I did was I just gave you 4 examples for the word yulad. And this is how the King James translated is something that has happened in the past. Why is it that the word yulad means something that happened already all other places, but only here in Isaiah 9 it's talking about something that's going to happen in the future? Let's go on. A son given to us, and the authority is upon his shoulder, which means it is something that already happened. The word batahi means it already happened. There, I did it again for you. This time I actually went to the book of Isaiah. I took 4 examples of where the word batahi is used in the book of Isaiah and showed you that the King James correctly translates the word batahi in all other places as something that happened in the past, but only here it throws it in the future. And his name is called, it doesn't say his name will be called or shall be called. The word Vayikra, and there's a famous book in the Bible named after it, doesn't mean something that will happen in the future. It means something that already happened. Vayikra means, and he called, past tense. So the first thing that they had to do was take an event that's telling us about the past and then throw it into the future. The second thing they do is they play up the name. Let me explain. The way this reads, it sounds like these accolades that we see here are actually going to be his substance, who he is. He's going to be the mighty God. He's going to be the everlasting Father. He's going to be the Prince of Peace. But actually what it says there, Vayikra Shemo, his name will be these things. Now, what do you mean by that, Rabbi Singer? I'll explain. If you examine Jewish names, most Jewish names have God's name in it,